Hello and thank you for joining us today. We will be discussing inequitable public transit in Toronto. So, what exactly is transit inequity? To put it simply, it states that the benefits of transit are unevenly distributed, affecting opportunities in education, employment, and entertainment. There are two general lenses that this can be solved through: vertical or horizontal equity. Horizontal equity stands on the foundation that there should be equal treatment for the equal. For example, those of equal age pay the same transit fare. Vertical equity, on the other hand, states that there should be unequal but fair treatment proportionate to the needs. For example, those with physical disabilities, pregnant women, and elderly have priority seating on all Toronto transit. Toronto suffers from vertical transit inequity in the decision-making and governance surrounding its transit system. The main challenges in this inequity are the transit network, service, and cost associated. A person living in a Toronto suburb can do all the right things: leave on time, get on the right connections, but a single delay anywhere along the route can cause them to be significantly late to work or school. Within the network, it must be addressed the degree of access that an individual has and the future development for the overall network. Rapid transit lines need to be added or extended to address this. The Ontario line aims to improve ridership as a first step in adding redundancy to the system and improving access. The second main challenge includes all things service: the reliability of service, frequency of delays, and duration of trips. Just in January of 2020, there was a train derailment that caused a delay during the morning rush hour for over 7 hours. Communications of the delay was lacking, and the TTC emergency solutions proved inadequate. Better planning is needed by the TTC to address emergency service disruptions. Better communication is also necessary from the TTC's management to transit operators and riders. Finally, the cost of the service, both to the commuter and the TTC, is a major challenge to be addressed. With most of the TTC's operating budget coming from fares, there is a limited ability to recoup losses and spend on new capital projects without government funding. To address this, the TTC has opted to increase fare enforcement to help capture more of the revenue, increasing fares and cutting fare integration programs. The Ontario-Toronto Transit Partnership Agreement is aimed at addressing the lack of funding at the municipal level to help with building capital projects. Our analysis has shown that current solutions lack adequate unplanned emergency response. Policy and budgeting allocated towards enhancing response times with existing measures, adding dedicated standby staff, and by providing UER simulation training would work towards solving this gap. Current solutions to recouping losses from fare evasion, such as stricter fare enforcement, is misguided. The opportunity exists to improve revenue generated through more diverse fare media, immediate access to funds loaded online like systems in the YRT, and replacing fines with future fares like policies in the Netherlands. Within communication, two major opportunities exist. Provide frequent, well-publicized public engagement opportunities within the TTC through regular rider surveys and re-establishing annual TTC town halls. Secondly, create a complaints ticketing system modeled by York Region Transit. On all things funding and decision-making, current solutions do not address vertical equity or transparency. The opportunity exists through the OTTP to allow for greater public input, third-party reporting, and future funding to be decoupled from specific projects. Our research revealed the changing power dynamics of the municipal and provincial governments with the introduction of the OTTP. An opportunity exists to more narrowly focus advocacy towards Metrolinx and the Government of Ontario. There is a need for public participation in transit governance, improved tracking of customer feedback and response, and better funding models to bridge equity gaps. With the significant drop in ridership during the COVID-19 pandemic, now is a good time for governments and transit agencies to examine how they can encourage vertical equity.
Hello, I'm Logan.
Hey, I'm Mary, and we're both trans athletes.
As a transgender disabled para-athlete, I chose to disengage from hockey/sledge hockey, as historically locker room culture survives on male-dominated humor, prejudice, sexist, racist, and homophobic so-called banter. As a trans man, I presented as female at one point in this locker room culture, and I was always conflicted about whether to intervene with this problematic banter because I had experienced the impacts of this disrespectful banter and wanted to disrupt this behavior. But I was also at the point of learning the social roles placed on me as a man. Once I started masculizing hormones, I realized my hockey division didn't have policies supporting trans people undergoing their medical transition in competitive sport, and I was excluded from competing. Soon after that, I started wheelchair basketball, and their governing body had transgender policy allowing me to compete safely without delaying my transition.
I always felt like I didn't really conform to the binary genders that are currently in place in society. I really struggled with this part of my identity throughout grade 9 and 10 because I went to an all-girls Catholic high school and I was profusely bullied for how I chose to express myself. My peers would constantly use transphobic slurs, and that also led me to quit my basketball team at school. Just as a preface, I also want to reiterate that trans people aren't just female to male or male to female. Non-binary and gender non-conforming athletes exist as well. We're just not as present in research and in sports culture.
This analysis recognizes the increasing visibility of transgender people in sports. We aim to contribute to the limited research about how transgender athletes are affected by exclusionary policies and practices within competitive sport, especially at the Olympics. Our research will include the societal, environmental, and medical aspects of exclusionary policies and practices within competitive sport affecting trans Olympians. Historically, the exclusion of trans athletes based on stereotypical ideals of gender roles, and gender identity has created policies and practices within sport which further immobilize the success of transgender athletes. Explicit and implicit exclusion of trans people by not recognizing their true identities leads to fear, ignorance, and discrimination from sport teachers, coaches, facility staff, other participants, and the public, which may result in simply discouraging participation in sports. The rigidity and privileging of masculine bodies has contributed to the hostile environment and attitudes towards trans athletes within the world of sport, resulting in the creation of exclusionary policies and practices affecting trans folk.
Check out this timeline that looks at the IOC policies affecting trans athletes. As mentioned by Logan, sex-segregated sports has been maintained throughout the 20th and 21st century with two assumptions. One, that humans come in only two forms, male and female, and two, that one of those forms, males, has significant biological advantages in terms of sports performance. So, since the 1930s, tons of sports organizations have used biomedical tests that are inherently subjective to uphold sex-segregated sports. By upholding sex-segregated sports, you're pretty much furthering the historical maintenance of heteronormativity, giving athletes like Logan and I no space to access sports in a safe way. This is us facing ethnocentrism. Yeah, we know that there's more knowledge being put out about supporting trans athletes, but we still need to challenge heteronormative constructs that are embedded in our daily lives.
The first systematic at-event sex testing was introduced at the 1966 European Athletics Championship, then taken up widely at other international sports events, eventually including the International Olympic Committee. These tests demonstrate the shifting balance of power and authority in sports sciences, as well as the clear conflict between biological, social, and cultural ways of understanding bodily differences. The treatment of male to female or feminine identifying trans athletes were surveilled more heavily than female to male or masculine identifying trans athletes. This shift in attention acknowledges trans athletes but maintains the persistence of the privileging of masculine bodies and of the patriarchal ideologies within competitive sport.
We are so grateful that the IOC has implemented policies to protect and support trans athletes, but we gotta acknowledge that not all countries who participate in the Olympics support trans athletes. Some countries aren't at a social or political place to discuss trans issues in general. At least 15 jurisdictions criminalize the gender expression of trans and gender diverse people. In at least 26 countries, public order offenses are used to criminalize trans people as well. These stats matter because it affects sports participation and the success of trans folks in athletics and success overall. We have a long ways to go until we reach the finish line of protecting trans athletes. Check out these recommendations you can take home to support trans athletes. Thanks for watching.